hit. The older that we get, the faster it tick, 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 ticks. Time flies. Whoa, whoa, time flies.
Good afternoon, Lyndall here with Marshfield Old School Times. Sorry we're just a little bit late. Ken and I were reminiscing, and I was getting all kinds of information from him before we started, and I looked up and thought, oh my goodness, it's 5 after. So, folks, this is going to be a fun day today. I really appreciate Ken coming in today. Ken Thompson, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's
Honorable
a pleasure,
Judge Ken
pleasure
Thompson.
to be here.
Well, thank you for making the trip. We're so excited. Ken's got a lot of knowledge of Webster County, and his family's were very, very instrumental in the beginning of Webster County and Marshfield area, and just it's just going to be a lot of interesting stories. We may get sidetracked and not put all the pieces of the puzzle together, but if we don't, maybe you can come back in the future because there's a lot to cover. So with that, we're going to get started just right off the bat here, and first we're going to talk a little bit about you. Ken, why don't you talk a little bit about you and who your folks were and when you came to the planet, and your wife and Sophia and so forth. Let's start with that.
Oh, well, my mother and father met when they went to Drury University, and they got married a couple of years after they graduated. My mother was from Marshfield, had grown up, spent all of her life in Marshfield, and my dad was from West Plains and had spent all his life there. And so when he got a job, and it was first in Kansas City, and then they got transferred to Louisville, Kentucky, and so myself and my brother Wally and my brother John were all born in Louisville, Kentucky, where we lived for about 8 years. Mm-hmm. And then Dad's job transferred him to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where we lived for about 4 years. From there, we went to suburban Chicago for a couple of years. And then one of the greatest moves that ever happened to us is we went out to Southern California and lived there for my junior high and high school years, and then a couple of years in college. Then my entire family moved back here in the 71 while I was in college, but they moved back and so to Marshfield. And so my little brother John graduated from Marshfield, but my brother and I, Wally and I, graduated from in Arcadia, California. And so I went to college at Drury, then college, now university, and then went to law school at the University of Missouri, Columbia.
So real quick, just for those that might not know, your dad was Otis Thompson.
Yep.
Your mother was Pat Foster.
Right.
So that's why we're going to be talking about the Foster and Fian families a lot today, and again, early Webster County families.
Right. Yeah, my dad's family would all have been from Howell County, except there are some Webster County relatives. I mean, I don't know if you knew Jim and Lita Summers. Mm-hmm. Jim was first cousins to my dad, and his kids, and Jamie, I call him Jamie. Thompson is my first cousin.
That's Thompson name,
Yeah.
And then Murray Thompson wasn't there.
He's
you never did
not
put
any
that
relation
together.
that I know about.
Thompson Furniture Company on the square in Marshfield years ago, and I know Murray Thompson was the owner, and he ended up being our state representative in the late 40s, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, mid 40s. But I thought I didn't know that if that was connected or not. Okay, so you did you get your undergrad in California, or did you just come to transfer to Drury?
No, I decided that I wanted to come back to Drury. Mom and Dad had gone there, and I spent lots of summers here in Marshfield, and I liked it. I said, well, I want something different. Southern California was great, but it's time to move out, and so I came.
The family all came back,
right?
So,
and so
it made sense.
I went 4 years to Drury.
I got you.
And then 3 years to Columbia to law school, and then fortunately, my mother's sister's husband, Ellsworth Hames, had a law firm, and he and Bill Sims invited me to come work with them, so that I came down and worked with Hames.
And Bill was his son-in-law.
Bill was his son-in-law.
So your mom's cousin, or
my cousin's husband.
Your cousin's husband. There we go. Yeah. So great family connections again. And it's interesting that you mentioned Ellsworth Hames. So the Hames family were very instrumental in the early Webster County days on the north side of Webster County,
in the St. Luke area.
St. Luke. The Hames was one of the early families out there, and of course, then the foster family came into the south side of the county initially, and we hear a little bit more about that. So that you ended up starting here as you pretty much immediately went in as assistant prosecutor, didn't you, when you got your degree?
Well, I'd been here almost 2 years, and
Yeah.
Don Cheever, who was the prosecutor, finagled the county to get him as assistant, and so it was me, and so I stayed his assistant for 20 some odd years, while he was prosecutor, and then. There was an opportunity for a new judge for Webster County because our population exceeded 40,000, and I was on the right side of the governor. It's the only way to explain it. You know what I mean? And so I got the appointment, and I did that for 18 years before I retired.
Nobody ever ran against you, did they?
No.
That's pretty amazing. How many years? 20?
18. So
18.
I ran 4 times. I got appointed for 2 years, and then I ran for four
Yeah.
four-year terms.
Amazing. Without an opponent in a county that was heavily Republican, so that's pretty amazing. I can't let this go. We've got to mention this. When you were assistant prosecutor, you had a famous celebrity that you actually had to prosecute.
Oh my gosh!
Tell us real quick about that. I think it's a funny story.
I was one of the local troopers. Had brought a person in off the highway, and he had a speeding ticket. Back then it was 55 miles per hour, so the speeding ticket, I believe, was 72 miles per hour.
It's been the late 70s, maybe early
55. 80s. It would have been, I want to say 85 or somewhere in there, 84, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
You'd think I'd remember that better. But they brought him in, and he was driving a Ferrari Testarossa, right? And he had his girlfriend with, I don't know if it was his wife or his girlfriend. He had a woman with him, and he had a hospital bracelet still on his arm.
Really?
Those kind of bracelets that you wore. And so the trooper brought him into the courthouse, and he took the people from the courthouse out, he showed them his car. He signed autographs for everybody in the courthouse.
Autographs.
And so.
Did you get one?
No. No, the audit, no. And then the trooper wrote him a ticket for speeding, and the prosecutors have discretion as what to do, and so I dismissed his speeding ticket and sent him on his way. He spent about an hour and a half here entertaining the people in the courthouse. But
that's a great story. You got to tell.
But oh my gosh, the outcry from people when they found out that I had done that. I was on what was it called, Cracker Barrel. I was on Cracker Barrel forever, and people wrote into the Marshfield Mail and just awfulest
never
things.
affected your career getting elected. But tell them who it was.
Oh, it was Richard Pryor. Sorry.
Richard
Well,
Pryor.
and then not to help me out any, Richard Pryor went on Johnny Carson just a couple of nights after that had happened, and he talked to Johnny Carson about driving across the country and how he'd got enough speeding tickets to paper his bathroom wall. So he did not help me at all.
That was probably about the height of his most. What's the word? When he was living pretty large, I would say.
Yeah, and I think, probably was either in the midst of or overcoming a drug problem and some other things.
Exactly. So. Yeah, he had a lot of problems, I'm sure, in those days. Well, that's a great story, and it's one that you can certainly tell your grandkids.
Oh my gosh! Yeah, thanks.
Because if you don't, everybody else will.
I've tried to hide that for 30 years. Thanks a lot.
Well, I wasn't going to press you to tell them that you let him out of the ticket. I just thought it was fun.
Yeah.
Any other interesting stories when you were in the courthouse that you'd want to share?
Oh my gosh!
That comes to mind.
I can't think of any.
I know you share a lot of good times with my uncle Eugene Fraker, the sheriff.
Oh man,
you
guys what a great man.
Great team.
He not only was he a great sheriff, but he was just such a good person.
Yeah.
I mean, I was brand new at what I was doing as a prosecutor. He just took me under his wing. He helped me out. He took me. I mean, what a great guy. He was just one of the best ever. And Bert too. Alberta was wonderful to me as well.
And of course, the sheriff's department had no budget back in those days, or not much, in those early days, and it was.
Alberta Fraker did the work of 3 men all by herself.
Yeah, dispatched from home
for
in
nothing.
Those early days. And in a 20-year period, grew that department from 3 or 4 people to what it became with a dispatch center and some road deputies. It was amazing during that time.
And it got mean, not Gene.
Yeah.
But the county got meaner as time went on, and worse things were happening. And we
The
had
population was exploding. Almost,
and we had a succession of murders in the county, and I think it just broke Sheriff Fraker's heart. He was
Well, I think that was a time. It was the big '80s, right? And
Yeah.
it was a time when our world was changing rapidly. We went from a quiet little Mayberry town, 1968, and by 1988, it was the world had changed.
Yeah,
You know,
that's right.
we had came. The Cold War was. I mean, the wall was about ready to come down. Things were just escalating, and you know, it was just a different. It was just a different era that we went from in that time frame, But anyway, great time though to grow up. I will say that in a small town, it was still a great time, a great place to grow up.
Oh.
We have a lot of great memories, and
Absolutely.
you know, I think about. I've told this story before, but I'll just briefly tell it because, you know, all the local merchants and all the fire department were also you had police on the fire department, you had the sheriff's department and judges and attorneys, and they were all in the fire department, and when some kind of catastrophe happened, they all jumped in and went. And the one night that the Berger family ended up on the overpass, one Halloween night I believe it was, and here come all the volunteer firemen with their sirens, and I remember a buddy of mine. Oh, there comes Detective Lurvy. There's Detective Lurvy. Well, Lurvy ran the carpet store, but I mean, he was a detective when he had to be, and that was just how it was, you know. And, everybody worked together to get things done. It was amazing. All right, so we're going to kind of move a little bit. Well, first of all, talk about your family.
I have my wife Joy, and I got married in 1992. So I was old when I got married.
You waited a little
I was
while.
40 when I got married, and she had a daughter, Ricky, who I think of as my daughter, and I think she was 6 when we got married, and then. In 1997, I had my daughter Sophia. We had my daughter Sophia, and she's. I guess that's the immediate family.
Yeah, and you got some grandkids.
And Ricky's got 3 boys.
3 boys.
3 great boys. Yeah.
Good deal. And then a great extended family, of course. John Thompson and Wally, your brother, and lots of nieces and nephews, and all good people. And I know just about all of them.
I'm sure you do. Yeah, I'm sure you do. Yeah.
A little bit different political affiliation than you are.
Well,
I mean, we could say that.
I've tried to get them to think correctly, but I just can't straighten them out.
And you told me one time your mother, you aligned with your mom's thoughts, and they aligned with your dad's thoughts, right?
My mother was a Democrat, my dad was a Republican, and,
Yeah.
and we discussed politics at the table.
Yeah.
And I
That's
learned
the way it should be, though.
I learned early on
Yeah.
that you can discuss politics and disagree and not hate somebody.
Absolutely.
You know, that you can still love a person even though you don't share the same political view.
And that's why you were elected 4 times.
Yeah, well.
And that's why you never had an opponent, because that's how it used to be, and that's how it should be today.
Yeah.
And I wish it was still that way. So let's talk a little bit about the Fian family, the Foster family, which are both your bloodline on your mother's side. And we're going to go all the way back. And if any of you don't have or have not read the Webster County Historical Society journals, I think there were 25 of these that I know of. There may have been more published later on, but the original 25, and then some special topics as well in addition to that. But in the very first number 1, December 1975, put together by a group of, I'm going to say, prominent Webster Countyans, like Howard Filmer was the president, who was also, an executive at Show Me Power, Mr. Roper, F.D. Roper, Lee Bentley from Seymour, Eugene Clifton, Hester Jackson. Mr. Jackson was the superintendent for many years, Jess Grizzell, Paula Sue Greer, Martha McGrath, a very talented historian, Lou Lagasse, and just these people did a lot of work to put these together. There's a lot of research, a lot of great stories that I promise you, had they not have done that, they would have now been gone forever. So my hat's off to this Historical Society of Webster County for doing this 50 years ago now, believe it or not, and making sure that this information can be passed on. And that's what we're here for. We're here to try to document history as well in a voice dialogue that I think will be important down the road as well. But in this first edition, the very first number 1 book, there's some great history about our county. And when you look at the families that were early settlers of Webster County, before Webster County was Webster County, when it was actually part of Wright County, part of Dallas County, part of Greene County, and one of those families was the Foster family. Other families, just to kind of give you an idea because you can still see a lot of the lineage here today. The Alcorns, the Lettermans, the Greers, that's Griers. Of course, the other Greers were as well, too. The Sylvies, the Puryears, the Haggards, the Blunts, as in Roy Blunt's family, the Bales, the Rhodes family, the Jumps, the Hameses we mentioned out north Webster County, the Haleys, Cantrells, Martins, Gentrys, Cardwells, Hargises, the Hartleys, the Hoovers, the Davises, the Smiths, the Brutons, the Hollands. I mean, there's families that the Day family came in from Kentucky in 1836, Robert Day, and made his home out in north of town where the Greer Creek and out in there. So just lots of families. But I think it's important to know today, since we're here with Ken, the Fosters. And so that first Foster that came to Webster County, let's start there. And I know he became Webster County's first county clerk. So why don't you kind of take it from there?
John Foster, who is the first one that came into this particular John, came in from Webster County. He had come from Wilkes County, North Carolina, where the Fosters had lived for many generations.
He would have been your fifth great, five greats?
Two greats.
Fifth generation back.
Right.
Two greats.
Exactly,
okay.
my two greats.
Yeah.
He and his wife, whose name was Sarah Jane Julian, and they called her Muddy Foster. And she's part of the same kin Julians of the other Julians that had been here for a while.
B.F. Julian, who was a mayor back in Marshfield.
Right. He was I don't know if he was a great nephew or something of hers, but I mean, sort of.
Yeah.
And they came with her brother. Oh, no, that's right, not right. They came with her father, Stephen Julian, and Stephen Julian and his wife, who was a Byram, came, and so that's who John Foster came with. John and Muddy came with Muddy's dad and mother.
And this would have been about what time?
Probably the early 1840s.
1840s.
And they was settled in the south part of the county, around Waldo, around Hazelwood, in that area, sort of north and a little bit east of Seymour, and they began to farm. They wanted to farm, and so they farmed, and after a while, John Foster and his wife moved up closer to Marshfield on the Turnbow, and that would probably have been around the 1850s when they moved up there. And
this would have been, the railroad wouldn't have been established yet.
Not yet.
Yeah.
No, the railroad wasn't there yet. And of course, the railroad is what made Seymour really turned it into.
And Marshfield.
And so.
So you would have had that Hazelwood settlement, and then and really probably not much until you got to out north St. Luke, right? Because that was the northern settlement.
Yeah, I'm not sure what existed if you went straight north from that area. I'm not sure what was out there, but I don't think much. I think there, and
like the stagecoach trail came through that northern, Wire Road and all that.
And so the Wire Road would have been how people got from St. Louis to Springfield.
Fort Smith, Arkansas, to be exact.
Yeah. And so there would have been probably people up and around that area.
Yeah.
But I think that's it. I think that's exactly right.
Between.
The reason I say that is because when the Fyens came from Pennsylvania, we haven't talked about them, but when they came from Pennsylvania in the 1850s, that's the route they came to come to settle into. I say they, it was only a he, to settle in Webster County.
Wire Road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
okay, go ahead. I didn't interrupt you, but it's good to kind of.
So they moved in, and then when Webster County in 1855, when it became a county, John Foster and John Foster became the first county clerk. And back then, the county clerk did the same job that like Stan Whitehurst does, and what Stephanie Vestal does, the circuit clerk. So he was in charge of both kind of things, and so he was the very first one in Webster County, but there were several. He had four kids, I guess. I may be wrong. One became a Copening, for the Copening out that way. One became
Fraker, wherever.
One became a Turner, for the Turners around. Then
that's kind of a Wright County, almost Western Wright County name too. The Turners.
I don't know enough.
But I mean, it was still. I don't really know enough. It would have been, close to Webster.
But they all settled around.
Yeah.
And it could have been. It was Wright County because it could have been that they sort of left from the Hazelwood area and went
that
east,
way, just a few miles, not that far actually.
Yeah, because anyway, but they were just mostly farmers, and he did buy some property, sort of near Marshfield on this what I call the south edge of Marshfield, between Bald Hill and A Highway, and
that'd be the Orrin Pierce.
That's the land that Orrin Pierce developed out there, right?
Across from the Saddle Club.
And I can remember as a kid, that's where we would go to pick blackberries. It's where I had my first encounters with black. I was a city kid, a suburban kid, so my first encounter with black snakes and other kinds of snakes and chiggers and ticks and you know what, when you pick blackberries, what you get into. But oh my gosh, we love the blackberry picking.
His family did your all's family have that up until like Orrin Pierce would have bought it, or
yes.
Is that right?
They sold
Pierces came in here from Conway. They were like Conway, Laclede County.
They sold it to Orrin Pierce, and I want to say it was in the '60s sometime.
Yeah, probably early '60s. Yeah.
But
interesting. Now, just to kind of give again a little background. So the first county court was held in May of 1855 in Hazelwood, in that area that we just talked about. So it was a pretty established area, community north of Seymour. Again, some family names. R.W. Jameson was the first county commissioner, the presiding commissioner. They called them judges then. Trimble and Goss were the associates. John Foster was the county clerk. J.B. Love was the first sheriff. Of course, the Love Farm, the Love Mansion over there, that was a big prominent name in that area. And then, and I was talking to Larry Roast this morning at breakfast. James McElwain was the first assessor, and he was appointed, not elected. And that would be Larry's great-great-grandfather or something like that. So McElwain was another prominent family name.
They met in the McClurg store, I think, didn't they?
McClurg store. And tell us about the McClurg.
I don't know much about the McClurgs other than that they were there. They were, I think, they were more prosperous than a lot of people. They had seemed like land, and they were able to work their land better than other people. And I think they had a fruit farm and an orchard and those kinds of things.
And Mr. McClurg went on to become governor of Missouri.
And so from that place they migrated, and then the Burfords wanted to give land for the city of Marshfield, and then that's how that was.
Right. So yeah, Joseph McClurg, actually he was in my research, what I read is he was the son-in-law or stepson of a fella. I may have wrote that down. William Murphy was his stepfather, and Murphy and McClurg had this general store over there at Hazelwood. But McClurg wasn't a native. He was born in St. Louis County, and then somehow been around the world around quite a bit. But his stepfather, his mother, ended up down in that country, and then he went on to become the governor of Missouri. But he didn't live in Webster County very long, I don't think. I mean, maybe 20 years or something, but went on but he was buried in Lebanon, so her family must have had some connections to Lebanon. But anyway, so now if you look at the plat map from 1877, there's quite a bit of property scattered around Webster County already, even then, with Fiann's name, Foster's name, and then I noticed there was a partnership with Fiann and the Rushes, Mr. Rush, which I don't know if it's the same one, but Frank Rush went on and became part of the Marshfield Canning Company, which would have had to probably been his grandfather or father, but he was involved with the Julians and the Nelsons, and Frank Stockton, Don Stockton's grandfather. We had Don on a few weeks ago, and we talked about that Marshfield Canning Company, and Frank Rush was a partner, another prominent business person in the county.
Well, the Fiann side of my family. I refer to him as Judge Fiann. He did that later in his life, but at this time he wasn't. And he was born in 1835 in Bedford, Pennsylvania, and he went to school in Pennsylvania. He went to law school in Maryland, and he studied with a lawyer in Pennsylvania. And then he and his very good friend, he became a major, James Rush, and he left Bedford, Pennsylvania. They came by covered Conestoga wagon, and they came from Pennsylvania, and they stopped in what's now Marshfield, and they bought some land in Marshfield, and this would have been in the 1850s.
Okay.
And so they remained there, and they set up shop and they practiced law for a little while. And then the Civil War took them both away from their legal practice, and they became full-time soldiers in the Union Army in the Civil War.
Okay, so that's the Rush connection with Rush and the land and so forth. So Civil War is over, then what happens?
Well, during the Civil War, Robert Fayenne became an officer, and he would go to Lebanon, Missouri quite often because the railroad would stop at Lebanon, and so there was a Union enclave in Lebanon during the Civil War. And so he would go and he would stay in a boarding house in Lebanon, and the boarding house was operated by a lady, Mrs. Harrison, who was the second wife of widow. She was widowed, but she was raising her stepdaughter, and the stepdaughter, whose name was Elizabeth Harrison, called Lizzie. Mm-hmm. And so Lizzie Harrison, as a I would say high school age, used to serve all the soldiers. At the boarding house, they would eat in the common meal, and one of the soldiers she served was Robert Fayenne, and so he fell in love with her, and by 1866 they were married and living in Marshfield.
Okay.
And he had just come off after the Civil War for a year or a year and a half. He was the prosecutor in Greene County, and when Wild Bill Hickok shot Dave Tutt, he was the prosecutor. He was the prosecutor in the Wild Bill Hickok.
About what year was that, you think?
That was 1866 or 65. 65 or 66. Yeah. It was right immediately after the war.
So she was his first wife, but she actually was widowed, you think? She had the daughter. Is that right? Is that what you said? No. She was the daughter.
She was the daughter of my three great grandmother. Died, and my three great grandfather remarried, and the person he remarried took care of the stepdaughter, who was really my relative.
Gotcha.
And so she then came to Marshfield, and they had a son. They lived in a house where, I don't know if you know where John Dickey used to live, but that's not the house, but it was in that location.
In that area.
And
that'd be just north of the Marshfield Mail.
Right. Yeah. Right. And so then she died when her little boy was maybe 7 or 8. That would have been my great-grandfather when he was 7 or 8. His mother died. And so then Judge Fayenne remarried, and he married a higher lady from up toward Rollo or St. James, somewhere from that area. He brought her back down here. He built a nicer house for her, and the tornado in 1880 wiped it out, and she was, when they found her, she was dead, holding a quill pen in her hand, writing a letter to her husband.
Really?
Yeah.
So he lost 2 wives.
So he lost 2 wives, and then he never did remarry.
Right.
And
how many children did he have then?
He only had 1 child.
Just had the 1 child.
And during this time, during the tornado, he was a circuit judge for this area.
Yeah.
And he would ride the circuit, and he was gone lots of times, because back then he'd go to Hartsville and spend 3 days in Hartsville, and then go to Camden and spend some time. So he was gone when the tornado was here, but when he got back, his wife was dead. Right. And then after that, he ran for Congress. And
where was the boy?
Well, the boy was at the Harrison relatives in Lebanon part of the time.
Really?
Part of the time he would go there. Yeah. And part of the time they sent him to Christian Brothers, which was a Catholic school. Yeah, and it was. So
he wasn't here for the tornado, and he saved his life, maybe. Possibly.
That's right. Yeah, probably so.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And what was his name?
His name was Robert Harrison Fayenne.
R.H. Okay.
And then he, so Judge Fayenne, when he went to Congress for, I think, 3 different terms, and then he died in 1896. But the house that's presently was owned by John Dickey. The Hameses owned it before. The Childresses owned it before that. It's where I'm talking about. It's on Clay Street. Well, that house was finished, I think, in about 1896, and just about the time that Judge Fayenne died.
Okay.
He finished that house. So his son and his son's wife and 3 children moved into the house, and the 3 children would be my grandmother, and then Robert Wallace Fayenne, who would be Marty Fogelsong and Jane Henson's father, right. And then William Harrison Fayenne, who was married to Eleanor Hackman. They didn't have any children.
Bill, we did.
So, right.
Okay, so a because I got to get it in my head.
Yeah.
So Judge Fyan passes away around 1899 or whatever, and the house was just being completed. Was that the house? Did he wait to build after the tornado till then?
Yes.
Pretty much.
Right.
Okay.
So the house that he built during the tornado was brick and it fell down.
Right.
And so this
It was over in that same area.
right, a little behind it,
Yeah.
what I would say west of
The
of
next
that
street
location.
over or something.
Right. But this house,
He probably owned all that like
He-
a farm.
he did.
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
and he owns some lots. I don't know if sometime he might have owned a lot of
Right.
it, but he owns some lots
Right.
there.
Right.
And then he built this house, which finished in 1896, and so he lived there just a short amount of time before he
Yeah.
died.
And then by that time, his son R.H. would have been how old? Maybe
Well,
old, married or not quite?
yes.
Okay.
Harry.
Harry.
We'll call him Harry.
And what did he do?
He was a lawyer.
He was a lawyer too.
And he was city attorney for Marshfield for a
Okay,
while, and
okay.
he just practiced law. I think he was born. I want to say he was born in '69. I
Okay.
could be wrong on that.
Yeah.
It could have been '67.
Sure.
But he died in like 1907.
Oh, yeah.
A young man.
Oh.
And he had 3 little children.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, his wife, whose name was Sophia,
Okay.
Sophia Wallace,
Gotcha.
Dr. Wallace's daughter, Sophia Wallace Fyan, raised those 3 kids. But she always hired what she called the man, and generally he was a person of color that was hired to look after,
Sure.
teach those boys how to be something other than wild and so forth. And
Yeah.
so, anyway, so that's who lived in that house.
What was that gentleman's name?
I can't remember.
Don't remember. Wasn't a Burford or?
If I ever knew, I don't remember.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So that's really interesting. And he was a congressman for what? How big was that district then? Do you know?
It went from Joplin to Rolla.
So it was
Part of it.
This whole
And
part
then,
of Missouri.
then it got smaller as time went on.
Yeah.
Missouri was in a population increase, a time of
Sure.
high population
Sure.
increase in that turn of the century.
In those early days, we may only had 2 congressmen or something for the whole state or whatever.
Right. Well, and most of the population in those early days was down the Missouri River.
Yeah,
Just a
exactly.
little bit down the
Exactly.
Mississippi, but mostly down the Missouri.
So would it be safe to say he's the only U.S. congressman that actually lived and was from Missouri or from Marshfield?
that I know of.
Yeah.
That I
Roy
know
Blunt,
of.
of course, was born in Webster County,
Close.
but
Yeah.
obviously was represented was
Yeah.
from Springfield. Interesting. Unless Mr. Case, I don't know if he went on, because I know he was a general and he served. He was a state senator. I know that.
Yeah, I don't know.
He was the only one from Marshfield as a state senator prior to Danny Clemens, actually. So, okay, so we've gotten to Harry Fyan passes, and then your grandmother, Sophie,
My great grandmother.
great grandmother, ends up with the 3 children,
Right.
and the daughter, the 2 boys, R.W. and then Bill, which many of us remember, that had the farms just west of the Spur Drive, all the land where the Fyan Addition, and then on the north side where Walmart is, all that, quite a bit of acreage. Of course, the interstate wasn't there. But then the daughter was your grandmother.
Right.
And her name was?
Elizabeth
Elizabeth
Fyan.
Okay,
Right.
let's talk
And
about
so
her a little bit.
that land you were talking about,
Yeah.
part of it that Bill Fyan had, he sold to sort of back into the family, sold it to John Foster.
Right.
And so,
Which would have been his nephew, right?
which would have been his nephew,
Your
right?
mother's brother.
My mother's brother.
Yeah.
And so his children, I mean, Tracy Gray and Rob Foster, are sort of the still hold
have
hold
it.
on that property.
Yeah, still have that, yeah. And then on the south side of the interstate, Marty and Jane, Marty Fogelsong, Jane Henson.
Right.
Obviously, the subdivision and the land around Webco, they still have that.
So when the judge died, he left, and I don't know how many acres it was, but it was a fair number of acres, and it was land that went from Marshfield almost all the way to the county line, up sort of up north toward Greene County, north of Stratford, but I mean
Right.
not that far, and then it went down the old highway, what we call the old highway, out for a ways, and that was his property, and it was a lot, and then
You could almost say between the Pomme de Terre River and Old 66. I mean,
for some reason Judge Fyan, because his family was forced to leave Ireland because they got in trouble with the English overlords, and they got in trouble, and so he always felt, I'd heard my family says, he always felt that like owning property was the most secure way to keep your wealth, to keep your position, and so he just tried to own as much property as he could.
Yeah. That's
he did, and
a
so
lot of truth to that.
and some of it's remained in the family, and Bob Fyan, Marty's and Jane's father, maintained it, and then Lucille, Bob's widow, maintained it, and then they've developed it, and so all of that land from the nursing home to the Dr. Robinson's office out there, and the clinic, and been subdivided, and then that land out there with Lund and all those boulevards, they developed, and that was in my lifetime, I think, in the 70s and 80s when they developed it.
Yeah, mine as well. So your great grandmother Elizabeth becomes of age, and then she marries
my grandmother.
Yeah, your grandmother.
My grandmother.
Your grandmother. I'm sorry.
My grandmother.
I'm sorry.
Elizabeth.
Yeah. Sophie's daughter. Your grandmother Elizabeth.
Yeah, my grandmother married, and so
Married Foster. No.
Her second husband was
Okay.
She married her first husband, and that didn't work out, and
Okay.
so they got divorced. And several years later, she married John Foster, who was. There's so many John Fosters, you can't straighten them out. But there was John Foster that moved into the county. Then his son was John B. Foster, who had the Marshfield Mill and the bank and some other things. And then his son was John Foster, who was my grandfather, and married Elizabeth Fyan.
Gotcha. Okay, and that's where the two families merge.
That's where the two families come together.
Yeah.
And then
So that John Foster was your grandfather.
yes.
And then they had two children, your mother and John.
Yeah, my grandmother had three children, so she had
Oh,
one by her first marriage.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And that would have been Ellsworth Hames's wife, Mary Elizabeth Hames.
Right.
And then my John Foster had two children with my grandmother, my mother, and then John Fyan Foster, who was
And your mother was Pat.
My mother was Pat. Yeah.
And then John that went on and made a career in the Navy.
Right.
And that's Robin Tracy's dad.
Exactly.
Yeah, and Ann's husband. Well, I think we've got that part figured out for a minute. So the Hameses, when your aunt, Ellsworth Hames's wife, was your oldest aunt there then.
Yes.
And of course, there again is another connection with the Hameses, an older Webster County family, and the Fosters. And then, just a lot of history there.
Something just, I don't know why this came to mind, but it's always an interesting story to me. My grandmother graduated from Marshfield. It was a different building, but this location in 1909.
Yep.
And in her graduating class were my grandfather, John Foster, who was older. For some reason, I don't know why that happened. And also Bess Cantrell, who would have been the mother of John Hosmer.
Yes.
And a case, I want to say Homer case.
Homer was the general. That was the general that went on. He served in World War One.
Yeah.
And then he, Marshfield's had 4 generals that have claimed you might say we're from Marshfield. And Case, Marty Robinson that we know, and Jerry Ragsdale, and Tom Jaco, who was the general over one of the forts in Texas.
Now you said Homer. I think Homer's younger, so it might have been a case woman. And anyway, there were, I think there were just 6 or 7 in the graduating class in 1909. Yeah. But my grandmother would tell the story that when she was younger, when she just first started school, and I think the school was still over here, she would come to the school, and she went to school with Edwin Hubble.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so Edwin Hubble, and she said that Edwin Hubble always wanted to walk her home and carry her books for her.
Really?
Yeah. And she said she was so silly. She said she was too stupid to realize she was in the presence of greatness.
So that would have been before 3rd grade, because allegedly he moved it.
Well, so I checked that out a little bit, and so there was one article I read where he moved before he was 6. But what happened was his father got a job in Chicago, and his father moved to Chicago, and he worked in Chicago, and he and his mother stayed here in Marshfield.
a lot, yeah.
And I think it was the third or fourth grade
Yeah.
when they
Yeah.
moved up to Chicago.
Yeah, I think that's about right. It's what I've always heard, at least. Yeah. Again, that quilt, those pieces just keep patching together, don't
it
they?
is amazing.
It is amazing.
My grandfather sort of inherit. My great grandfather, John B. Foster, died on Christmas Day in 1925. So consequently, the Foster family never celebrated Christmas on Christmas Day. They always celebrated it on Christmas Eve day.
Christmas Eve, yeah.
Just because that was so traumatic for them.
Yeah.
And it was an unexpected illness.
Sure.
And so, but he left the mill to my grandfather, the Marshfield Mill.
I see.
And
now he was the one that was on the bank board.
He was on the
He was a
Citizens
pretty
Bank.
prominent businessman.
And he had a mercantile where he sold men's clothing, or I think men's clothing. I'm not sure. Maybe.
And tell him where that was at.
And it was sort of, well, it's right there. It's no longer there. It's on the corner of the square where that little entrance to the bank building
the
is.
atrium that
Atrium.
Washington and Clay.
Washington Clay, yeah, exactly.
And of course, and you might mention the house, John's house,
And so then the White House behind it was built by John B. Foster and his wife Arabella McMahon Foster, and they finished it around 1901, and the widow lived there until she died in 1951, and then her adult children, two of whom never married, lived there, and as the children got older, they would come back and live there just before they died, and so I think all of them except for my granddad came back and lived, and Maury came back and lived there, and so and then the last of the sisters sold that house to my brother John and his wife Carolyn, and so John and Carolyn have restored it and brought it back to a living house again.
They've had it now for a lot of years, haven't they?
Yeah, they've had it.
40 years, maybe.
A long time. Yeah.
So that's interesting that you had both of your the Fosters had that old house right next to the square over here, and the Fiennes had the older house. I mean, all those that lineage on the north side of the square, right?
Yeah.
Both right there together.
That just reminds me of another story.
You
want to hear another?
Yeah,
story?
we got 10, 12 minutes.
Well, on Jefferson, where the old bus station used to be, was where Dr. Wallace had his house. Dr. Wallace was a prominent physician in town, and in fact, he opened his house to all the injured people during the tornado, and they treated him in his house. And he lived there until he died in, I think, 1903 or 1906, somewhere in there. But one of his daughters' name was Sophia Wallace, and she said she used to, my grandmother told me this, there was a swinging gate. There was a white picket fence, and there was a swinging gate on this fence. And she used to swing on the gate, and it would swing out, and she could look across the square all the way down Jefferson Street, and she could see Harry Fiennes, that would be the judge's son, walking across the street, which would have been from where the post office is to now where the law office is, but that's where the judge's law office was. And she would always see him walking across the street. She thought he was hot. So
they didn't use a term like that.
No, they didn't. And so they ended up getting married. But
was Dr. Wallace? Were they kin to the Wallace family in Lebanon that were the hospital and the Wallace Hospital, and that was a very prominent medical family down there. I'm just curious.
Not that I know about.
Yeah.
Well, he was kin to Smith Glen Calloway Clinic. Wallace Smith is the Smith, and so that was his son.
And that was
his grandson.
That was Wallis.
Right. So
right. And so if you go to the cemetery, there's a monument, a big monument with Wallis.
Right. And that's him. That's Christopher Wallace. That's the doctor.
That's the doctor.
And his wife is there.
Okay. And isn't I'm putting some more pieces together, but I believe that there's a connection there with Roy Nelson and Hattie Smith, and the big house in the park. I think that Wallace connection is there. I could be wrong.
I don't know. I don't really know. His wife was a Hoover from out toward the Elkland area, but
But Hattie, that family's connected to the hospital in Lebanon, the Breach family.
right. So I know who I remember Hattie
yeah.
Smith. I will always remember Hattie Smith,
Yeah.
but and her house. And
it was
her daughter married a Breach.
The Lebanon Breach.
Yeah.
And of course, Breach ended up being executive with Ford Motor Company in Detroit and flowed money back to Lebanon for the hospital, and I mean that's all.
Built the business school at Drury.
Yeah, Breach. That's right. But I think there's a connection with the Wallaces and them.
It could be. I don't know.
Yeah.
I will. The connection is also one of the Wallace daughters married Samuel Dickey. So the Dickey house was a Wallace woman. I mean, mother, wife was at the Dickey house.
So is that the connection that John Dickey had to your family?
So right. So John Dickey's father and my grandmother would have been first cousins.
Okay.
Because their mothers would have been sisters.
Okay.
So John Dickey's grandmother was a sister to my grandmother's mother.
Sophie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm getting there.
Yeah. Yep. That's right.
Okay.
So the Wallaces, interestingly enough, during the Civil War, they were Southern sympathizers. They'd come up from Virginia, and by way of Tennessee, and they'd come in. I want to say 1852 or 1853, somewhere like that. I might be wrong on that. It might have been later than that, maybe 1858. They came later, and they just spent a few years here, and he set up his practice. But when the Civil War began, his two brothers also then moved here and began to practice. But when the Civil War began, his two brothers joined the Confederate Army, and Dr. Wallace moved to Arkansas. And so he left Marshfield and moved to Arkansas while the war was going on. And my grandmother, Sophia, was born in actually Batesville, Arkansas.
Yeah. Huh.
And then he came back in the late 1860s.
Did he move there because of the war?
Yeah. And then he came back when things were calmer.
Yeah.
And so he lived here. But it's interesting that Sophia Wallace would have been the daughter of a Southern sympathizer marrying Harry Fayenne, who would have been the son of a Yankee officer.
So did they go to the condo building or the St. John's building for church?
The Fosters went to this Missouri, the Methodist South. The Fosters went to the Methodist South.
They went south,
and I don't know if that's because that's where they always went or what. But I don't know that Judge Fayenne's family was Roman Catholic, and he gave it up because he thought for a lot of reasons he gave it up. But he ultimately gave the land for the Catholic Church, the old Catholic Church where it's located now. He gave that land to them to build the church. Yeah. I think he always felt guilty. And I remember my grandmother, when she was ill, was kind of wouldn't have minded to have last rites. So there was something still that Catholicness, that was still about. When did she
pass away?
She died in 1973.
73.
So, but I don't know. Grandma, I call her Grandma Fayenne because my mother called her Grandma Fayenne. But Sophia Wallace Fayenne, lived in that house as a widow for 40-something years, and I don't know that I don't know if she went to church. She must have. I mean, surely she did, but I just never really did hear much about it.
Right.
I don't know.
Now the Foster ladies were big in our church, in the North Methodist Church. I guess you might say.
Yeah. I'm not by the time I was.
Yeah, that was
it
all.
Was coming. It was all one church.
But then. Yeah. That was after 39 when they united, or didn't unite yet, but.
Well, 30 when the North and South came together, it was 39. Then they united in 60-something.
68 or 68, I think.
EUB.
So, yeah. Wow. So much information.
Sorry.
No,
you just get a little guy talking. He's always telling stories.
I love it. I'm feeding you, man. I love it. So, wow. Well, gosh, where can we go from here?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. Kind of a loss all of a sudden, but it's as you well know, an extended family is really an interesting thing, and it's you learn so much from watching them, and it's not they're an exemplary family to follow. I mean, they all had their troubles, and then
Sure.
they had their good points and so forth. But it's a unique opportunity to come back and be in the neighborhood where everybody lived for all these years
Right,
to see
right,
how things were
right.
done. I mean, I just feel so blessed to have been able to come back and spend
Absolutely.
nearly 50 years in Marshfield, and
Yeah.
around these places.
Bob was your great uncle, Bob Fine.
Yes,
And of course, he was a state representative
Yes.
in the 30s.
in the Depression.
In the Depression. And imagine what it would have been like to serve anywhere, whether it's Congress or State House or anywhere in those times. It would have been extremely difficult to be able to know what to do to make sure that. And of course, he was a Democrat in Missouri in those days, which was Democrat controlled big time, and FDR and all of the programs that the government came up with, which were necessary in those times.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a tough time. Not unlike it was, I mean, in a very minute way, like during COVID, when we all were getting help from the government, or most people were, and so people, they had to have that to live and survive. But it would have been I'm sure the money was tight. I'm sure it was hard, but those guys and gals, they pulled us through it, and some would say World War II actually pulled us through it, but they had turned the corner before the war. I mean,
But if you watched as a younger person, I watched those people who had been through the Depression. They treated life differently than
No question.
They saved everything.
They did.
They never overspent. I mean, they never really overextended.
No.
They never threw away.
they accumulated.
They
accumulated.
They did.
But they didn't spend it.
They believed in savings.
They did.
I can remember when I first came back and I was trying to buy a house, and the interest rates were going, Jimmy Carter, and interest rates were going up
yeah,
and up and
yeah.
up, and it was horrible.
Yeah.
And I remember complaining to my Aunt Lucille Fayenne about how awful these interest rates were, and she said, "Oh no, they're wonderful." Because if you've saved money, you thought they were great.
That's
You know what I
true.
mean?
Yeah, that's
but if,
true.
If
People
you
on
were,
that end,
if you
yeah.
were just starting trying
Yeah.
to buy a house, they were terrible.
Right. No, and the other thing that generation had, and of course that was your parents' generation. They came of age. I mean, they were children during the Depression. They relied on their faith.
Yeah,
Faith was
absolutely.
And I'm sorry, in my opinion, faith was more important to them than faith is today to many, and that's how I see it. But I don't know, and it's sad that we have to have a depression or tragedy or something like that for us to remember our faith.
Of course, I still believe faith's fundamental. It's critical. I mean, I don't know how you exist without it. But it is interesting. Those people who went through the Depression. My grandmother tells the story about Christmas, the celebration of Christmas in those years. They would all go to the church for Christmas, and every kid at the church had one present under the tree from the usually a doll for the girls, or a truck or something for the. I don't know if they had trucks in those days, but they had something for the boys, and that was it. There was no. And you know what we did to our kids at Christmas time.
No,
like,
I know.
how many things from different stores
Yeah,
can we
how many
buy?
packages can you wrap?
Yeah. And
That's right.
And they loved Christmas because everybody got together in the community and they ate and they opened their presents
Right.
and everybody was happy.
There's two things that I observe knowing your family and your extended family and have all my life, and two things that I can tell you that I've observed, and that's very honorable and it's very noteworthy, and that is, well, three things. Their faith, but then the closeness, the loyalty to each other.
Yeah.
I think it's just unprecedented, and how important education has been to your family. When you look at the lawyers and going all the way back to your great grandfather, the judge. I mean, education, it appears as though, is extremely important to that family, and all three of those things: the loyalty, the education, have all been paid off. I mean,
Of course, my family had given up the farm. Most of them had given up the farm. So my dad's side is different, but on my mother's side, and so if you're a farm family, an education isn't. The more important education is what you get from working the farm,
right?
And
Absolutely.
understanding that. Yeah. And so maybe it wasn't quite the same thing. But if you didn't work the farm, an education is the only way that you ever could move ahead
right.
in the world. And so my family was big in stressing education.
Yeah,
And mostly, I like them all. I mean, I even like the ones they married. So I I like.
Well, again, there's not that the marriages sometimes don't work all the time and what have you, but the family is still, the nucleus is still.
Yeah, that's right.
You have the loyalty, and I don't see you fighting over who's going to get mama's car and things like that, like some families, seem to have problems with. But I got to tell this story. It's about time to go. It's a minute after. I think I've told you this, but I'll mention it again in this format. But when I was running the Walmart store out here, and your mother came in, and she'd retired by then, and Ken's mother was, in my opinion, extremely wise history teacher, and very observant in what was going on in the world, and kept up with all those things, I'm sure. And at that particular time, I believe it was after 9/11, and maybe we were getting ready to go into Iraq or whatever it was that we did in those days. Things were kind of uneasy, and we were talking in the aisle, and something about whatever the hot topic of the news was regarding all that, and she said, "Well, let me tell you." She said, "I think I might have even asked her what her thought was," and she said, "Well," she said, "I can tell you that the answer is in the mothers of those people. It's the mothers that will dictate and determine where this world heads down the road, and how those people are being nurtured and mothered and raised, and because and that's so true today, and was so true all through history. The way we raise our children is going to be a big factor in how people treat each other and where we go in world peace and so forth. So
Yeah.
I just always remember that,
Yeah.
because she was very eloquent with her wording, and she was my history teacher for a year or two, and I enjoyed her so much.
Yeah, she was my first teacher too.
Yeah, I'm sure.
My longest running teacher.
She did a darn good job when it comes to history, because this has been a real treat for me, and I know for the people that have been watching, and that we've looked forward to having you come on. So
I don't know about the rest of them, fellas, but it was thoroughly enjoyable to
good.
me too.
It goes by fast, doesn't it?
It does. It
Well,
does.
think about what we can talk about the next time, and I'll have you come back.
That'd be great.
All right.
That'd be wonderful.
All right.
Thank you very much, Lyndall.
You betcha.
Thank you.
We'll see you all soon. We got some more people that we've been talking to about being on the show, so thank you all for joining us. Thanks.
Goodbye. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Let me turn this off.